The air in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was thick with the scent of money old, new, and desperate. It was a suffocating perfume of wilting gardenias, expensive champagne, and the collective self-satisfaction of New York's philanthropic elite. Emily Carter stood near a towering marble column, a ghost in a simple navy gown. Holding a glass of sparkling water, she had no intention of drinking. She was an island of quiet composure in a sea of performative charity. From this vantage point, she had a perfect view of the stage where Margaret Whitmore, matriarch of the Whitmore dynasty and host of the evening's gala, was about to speak. Margaret was a vision in blood-red Chanel, her silver hair coiffed into a helmet of serene authority. Her smile, a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry and social warfare, was currently fixed on Emily. Emily felt the weight of that smile from across the room. It wasn't a greeting. It was an assessment, a weighing and measuring that always found her wanting. She met the older woman's gaze and held it, offering nothing back. No fear, no deference. Just a calm, unreadable stillness that she knew drove Margaret to distraction. A hush fell over the room as Margaret tapped a perfectly manicured nail against the microphone. The projected images behind her shifted, displaying smiling children and the logo for the Whitmore Foundation for At-Risk Youth. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Margaret began, her voice a smooth, cultured melody that belied its capacity for venom. "Your generosity is, as always, overwhelming. It is because of you that we can continue to lift up those less fortunate, to give a hand to children who have been dealt an unfair hand in life." Her eyes scanned the crowd, pausing on faces of consequence bankers, politicians, rival doyens before landing once more on Emily. "And tonight, we are especially grateful for a substantial, and entirely anonymous, donation that has allowed us to exceed our fundraising goal," Margaret continued, her voice dripping with magnanimity. She tilted her head, a gesture of faux humility. "We don't know who this benefactor is, but I can only imagine it is someone who understands, perhaps from personal experience, what it means to pull oneself up from nothing. Someone who knows the value of a helping hand because they themselves were once a charity case." The words were delivered with a gentle, almost pitying smile, but her gaze was a stiletto, aimed directly at Emily, a ripple of cognoscenti snickers, disguised as coughs and murmurs, moved through the front tables. They all knew. They knew her son, Brandon, was dating a girl from nowhere, a foster kid from Oakland. They all understood the code. For a moment, the opulent ballroom dissolved. The clinking of crystal and the soft hum of conversation faded into a different sound, the squeak of worn linoleum and the metallic clang of a closing locker. "She is 9 years old. Her shoes are from a donation bin, a size too big, stuffed with newspaper at the toes. She stands in a line in the sterile hallway of the county group home. Mrs. Davison, a woman with a perpetually sour expression and keys that jangle with every step, is handing out winter coats. It's the annual charity drive. A local church has donated them." "Emily Carter," Mrs. Davison calls out, her voice flat and bored. She holds up a thin, pink jacket, its zipper broken. Emily steps forward, her eyes on the floor. She can feel the other children watching. They all know the rules. The new arrivals, the ones who cause trouble, the ones no one wants. They get the last pickings, the broken things. "Here," Mrs. Davison says, thrusting the coat at her. "Say thank you to the good people of St. Jude's. Be grateful someone cares about a charity case like you." The words hang in the air, cold and heavy. Charity case, a label, a brand. It means you are a project, not a person, a burden to be managed. Emily takes the coat, the cheap polyester ruff against her small hands. She doesn't look up. She doesn't cry. She folds the jacket neatly, tucks it under her arm, and walks back to her place in line, her spine perfectly straight. She can feel the heat of shame on her cheeks, but she locks it away, deep inside, in a place she is building brick by painful brick, a place where their words cannot reach her. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, leaving an icy calm in its wake. Emily took a slow, deliberate sip of her water. Her expression remained placid, a mask of polite interest. The crowd saw a young woman, pretty in an unassuming way, stoically enduring the casual cruelty of her boyfriend's powerful mother. They saw a victim. They had no idea they were looking at a predator. Brandon materialized at her side, his hand finding the small of her back. He was beautiful, with his golden hair, his easy smile, and the casual entitlement that came from a lifetime of never having been told no. He was also, Emily knew with a certainty that had settled into a cold, hard stone in her gut, a coward. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. His blue eyes clouded with a vague discomfort. "Mom can be a little on the nose sometimes. She doesn't mean anything by it." "I'm sure she doesn't," Emily said, her voice even. "She's just passionate about her charity work," he added, a lame excuse he'd used a dozen times before. "She sees everything through that lens." Emily turned her head slightly to look at him. She saw the weakness in the set of his jaw, the desperate need for everything to be easy, pleasant. He loved her. She believed, in his own shallow way. But he loved his comfort more. He loved the gilded cage his mother had built for him. "Of course," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Across the room, Margaret had moved on, accepting applause, her duty as the benevolent queen of New York society fulfilled for another evening. But her message had been delivered. To Emily, to the world they both inhabited, one as a ruler, the other as an intruder. Emily's phone vibrated discreetly in her clutch. A single line of text from David, her CFO, and her only true confidant. "Phase 2 is greenlit, awaiting your final authorization." She looked from her phone screen to Margaret's triumphant face. She thought of the 9-year-old girl with the broken jacket. She thought of the carefully constructed life she led, the modest apartment, the fabricated job title, the complete erasure of her true identity. It was all a means to an end that was now, finally, within reach. Brandon squeezed her hand. "Let's get out of here. We can go to that little Italian place you like." He wanted to smooth it over, to pretend it hadn't happened. He didn't understand that it had been happening for months, in 100 small ways. This was just the first time it had been public. "In a minute," Emily said, her gaze locking with Margaret's one last time. A silent declaration of war passed between them. She typed her reply to David, her thumb steady. "Authorize it and accelerate the timeline." The world saw a charity case. Soon, they would see what a charity case could do with a $12 billion grudge. Emily's life was a masterclass in compartmentalization. By day, she was E.M. Carter, the phantom CEO of Carter Dynamics. Her name was a whisper on Wall Street, a legend in Silicon Valley. From her sterile, minimalist office on the 80th floor of One World Trade, she commanded a global logistics empire built on the intricate, beautiful logic of her own proprietary code. The office was a temple of sterile tension. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling circuit board she could manipulate at will. The only sound was the quiet hum of the servers in the next room, the true heart of her power. No personal photos adorned the sleek, glass desk. No clutter softened the sharp lines of the Italian furniture. This was a space for a mind, not a person. David Mitchell, her CFO, was the only one who saw the person behind the phantom. He was a man whose loyalty was forged in the fire of a shared history of corporate destruction. The Whitmores had destroyed his father's company. Emily had given him the means to fight back. "The PI Margaret hired is named Frank Miller," David said, placing a tablet on her desk. His voice was always calm, a steady anchor in Emily's turbulent plans. Ex-NYPD. Thorough, but old school. He's been sniffing around the address for the shell corporation we listed on your rental application. "Let him sniff," Emily said, not looking up from her own screen, where she was tracking the algorithmic demolition of a rival shipping conglomerate. The trail leads to a P.O. box in Delaware, which forwards to another in the Caymans, which is owned by a holding company that hasn't existed for 5 years. He'll be chasing his own tail. "He also put a tail on you," David added. "A beige sedan. Amateurs." Emily almost smiled. "I know. I lost him in the 34th Street subway station this morning." Her other life, the one the beige sedan was tracking, was that of Emily Carter, a mid-level logistics consultant for a vague, non-existent firm. This Emily lived in a modest one-bedroom in Hell's Kitchen, wore clothes from department stores, and took the subway. This Emily was dating Brandon Whitmore, heir to the Whitmore fortune. Their relationship was real, and that was the most dangerous part. She hadn't planned on the affection. She'd approached him with the calculated precision of a military strategist, studying him, learning his habits, his desires, his profound weaknesses. He was charming, kind in a thoughtless way, and desperate for an identity outside his mother's suffocating influence. He saw in Emily a refreshing authenticity, a woman unburdened by the cynical games of his social class. The irony was a constant, bitter taste in her mouth. She genuinely liked him. At times. In the quiet moments walking through Central Park at dusk, or sharing takeout on the floor of her apartment. She felt a dangerous pull, a longing for the simple, uncomplicated life she was pretending to have. But then, Margaret would call, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness, and the cold resolve would return. The Whitmore mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was the antithesis of her office. It was a place of suffocating opulence. Emily hated it there. The air was heavy with the scent of wilting lilies and lemon polish, a desperate attempt to mask the decay of old money. Sunlight struggled to pierce the heavy brocade curtains, leaving the rooms in a perpetual, gloomy twilight. Priceless antiques sat unloved and unused, shrouded in a film of dust that the daily staff could never quite conquer. Portraits of stern-faced Whitmore ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her with silent judgment. The source of Emily's animosity, the secret furnace that fueled her every move, was a memory of fire. It came to her in nightmares, a chaotic collage of smoke, screaming, and the smell of burning wood. She was 7 years old. She remembered her father, a small-time real estate developer with more dreams than capital, his face streaked with soot and tears. She remembered her mother's hollowed-out eyes in the weeks that followed. A fire had consumed their largest property, an old apartment building in the Bronx. The insurance company refused to pay, citing faulty maintenance. The Whitmores, silent partners in the venture, sued them for negligence. The lawsuit, combined with the loss of the property, ruined them. Her father died of a heart attack within the year. Her mother followed 2 years later, succumbing to what the doctors called a broken heart. Emily called it murder by 1,000 cuts. She had been planning her revenge since she sold her first piece of code at 16. She believed, with the unshakable certainty of a grieving child, that the Whitmores had set the fire for the insurance money, using their power to pin the blame on her father. Her life's work was to accumulate enough power to return the favor. Margaret's animosity, however, was something Emily hadn't fully anticipated. It was deeper than simple class snobbery. There was a personal, visceral quality to her hatred that went beyond protecting her son from a gold digger. During one excruciating weekend in Greenwich, Emily found a clue. She'd been wandering the cavernous second floor and found herself in a hallway lined with family photos. Tucked away at the very end was a faded picture of a young girl with bright, laughing eyes. A girl who looked nothing like the severe, controlled Whitmores. That was my sister, Elizabeth. Margaret's voice, sharp and unexpected, came from behind her. Emily turned. Margaret was standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression cold. "She's beautiful," Emily said. "She's dead," Margaret replied flatly. "There was a fire. Years ago." She said the word fire with a strange, choked emphasis. A flicker of something unresolved. Ancient pain crossed her face before the mask of icy composure slipped back into place. "This wing is private. You should go downstairs." The encounter was a puzzle piece Emily couldn't yet place, but it sharpened her focus. The vendetta was mutual, even if Margaret didn't know who she was truly hating. The proposal happened on a crisp October evening, 3 months after the gala. They were on a rowboat in the middle of the lake in Central Park, the lights of the city creating a glittering, artificial corona around them. It was a perfect, cliché movie moment, and Brandon executed it with earnest, clumsy sincerity. He didn't get down on one knee, the boat was too wobbly. Instead, he simply stopped rowing, letting them drift under the bow bridge, and took a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Emily," he began, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "I know my family. I know my mother can be difficult, but none of that matters. What matters is you. You make me feel real, like I'm not just a name or a trust fund. I love you." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant diamond ring. It was beautiful, but Emily's mind was a whirring calculator. The cut, the clarity, the carat. It was a $2 million ring, and it was a cage. "I know this is fast," he said, misinterpreting her silence, "but I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to show them all, show her that they're wrong about you. Will you marry me?" Here it was, the key, the final, irrevocable step that would give her the access she needed to dismantle the Whitmore empire from the inside. Accepting was not a choice. It was a strategic necessity. The part of her that felt a genuine warmth for the man in front of her screamed in silent protest. She was using his love as a weapon. But then, she remembered her father's face, the smell of smoke, the cold finality of a child welfare office. She remembered Margaret's voice at the gala, branding her a charity case for the world to hear. "Yes," Emily said, her voice soft but firm. "Yes, Brandon, I'll marry you." The relief and joy that flooded his face was so pure it was painful to watch. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It felt heavy, a cold manacle of purpose. As he leaned in to kiss her, her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She knew without looking that it was David. The merger negotiations between Whitmore Industries and Carter Dynamics had reached their final, critical stage. The Whitmores, desperate for Carter's logistics platform to save their crumbling real estate empire, had no idea the woman their son was proposing to was the same phantom CEO who held their company's fate in her hands. That night, back in her sterile apartment, she called David. "He proposed. I accepted," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure about this?" Emily David asked. His concern was genuine. "This is getting personal." "It was always personal," she replied, twisting the diamond ring on her finger. They made it personal 20 years ago. It's time to initiate the final phase. Give them everything they want in the merger contract. Make them believe they're getting the deal of a lifetime. Let them walk right into the trap. "And the wedding?" David asked. "Set the date for 6 months from now," Emily said, looking out her window at the distant, glittering lights of the Whitmore building. "The day after their first quarterly payment to us is due. It's going to be a very memorable celebration." Margaret's reaction to the engagement was a nuclear winter of passive aggression. She threw them an engagement party at the Greenwich Mansion, a nightmarish affair where Emily was paraded around like a curiosity. The cruelty was never overt. It was 1,000 tiny cuts delivered with a polite smile. "Emily, dear, you must meet the Vanderbilts," Margaret would say, steering her towards a fossilized couple. "They were just asking about your background. I told them it was a remarkable story of perseverance." The subtext was clear. She's a project, a stray we've taken in. When Emily wore a simple but elegant dress she'd bought for the occasion, Margaret complimented it with devastating precision. "That's a very practical choice. Dear, it's so refreshing to see someone unburdened by labels." Emily's responses were always calm, polite, and maddeningly ambiguous. "Thank you, Margaret. I believe in timeless style." She would smile, a serene, unbreachable wall, leaving Margaret and her cronies unsure if they had landed a blow. Behind the scenes, the real war was escalating. Frank Miller, the private investigator, was proving more tenacious than anticipated. David's team fed him a steady stream of misdirection false employment records, carefully doctored resumes leading to defunct companies, a fake social media profile for a different Emily Carter, who lived in Ohio. But Miller was a bloodhound. One afternoon, Emily was having lunch with Brandon at a cafe in Soho when he glanced out the window. "That's funny," he said. "That's the same beige sedan that was parked outside your apartment this morning." Emily's heart gave a single, hard jolt, but her face remained impassive. She followed his gaze. Miller was sitting in the car, trying to be inconspicuous and failing miserably. He was getting closer. "Probably just a coincidence," she said, taking a calm sip of her iced tea. But that night, she and David orchestrated a complex digital counteroffensive. They didn't just erase her tracks. They built new ones. They created a legend for the consultant, Emily Carter, complete with a robust LinkedIn profile connecting her to a shell company David had set up years ago. They populated it with fake endorsements and a detailed work history. The close calls became more frequent. At another disastrous Whitmore family dinner, Brandon's uncle, a boorish man named Richard, began talking about a recent deal his investment firm had lost. "Some damn ghost is running this Carter Dynamics," Richard grumbled, swirling the brandy in his glass. "No one's ever seen him. We tried to buy out one of their suppliers, and they countered with an offer that was 3 times ours. All cash. Within an hour. They operate with the speed of a machine. It's unnatural." Emily kept her expression neutral, carefully cutting her filet mignon. "Their logistics algorithms are revolutionary," she offered mildly. "I've studied their public patents. It's brilliant work." Richard looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You know about that?" "A little," she said with a self-deprecating smile. "It's my field, after all." Margaret watched the exchange. Her eyes narrowed. The PI was a tool, but Margaret's own intuition was the real threat. She sensed that Emily was more than she appeared, and the not knowing gnawed at her. She intensified the pressure on Brandon, subtly poisoning him against Emily, questioning her motives, her past, her very nature. The wedding planning became her primary battlefield, a constant campaign to humiliate and isolate Emily, to force her to crack under the pressure. The months leading up to the wedding were a blur of escalating tension. By day, Emily commanded her empire, finalizing the details of the Whitmore merger, a contract so full of hidden clauses and kill switches that it was less a partnership and more a meticulously crafted instrument of destruction. By night, she played the part of the beleaguered but patient fiancé. The flashbacks to the fire grew more frequent, more vivid. She would wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom smell of smoke in her nostrils. She saw her father's face, not streaked with soot, but pale and waxy in a casket. She remembered the whispers at the funeral. Such a shame. That fire. Terrible negligence. The Whitmores hadn't even sent flowers. Her own investigators, a team of elite digital forensics experts, were digging into the 20-year-old cold case of the Bronx fire. They sifted through archived police reports, insurance claims, and financial records from the period. They were looking for the smoking gun, the definitive proof that the Whitmores had orchestrated everything. "We found something," David said one evening, his face grim as he looked at the file on his screen. The fire inspector on the original case, a man named Sullivan. He ruled it accidental, citing faulty wiring. 6 months later, he retired and bought a 50-foot yacht and a condo in Florida, on a city pension. "Find him," Emily ordered. Meanwhile, her relationship with Brandon was beginning to fray. Her constant patience, her refusal to be provoked by his mother, began to look less like strength and more like detachment. He wanted her to fight back, to get angry, to show the passion he mistook for love. But Emily's emotions were on a leash, reserved for a single, all-consuming purpose. "Why don't you ever stand up to her?" he'd ask in frustration after a particularly brutal encounter with Margaret. "What would you have me do?" "Brandon," she'd reply, her voice calm. "Scream at her in her own home. 'Cause a scene, that's what she wants. She wants me to behave like the stereotype she has of me." "So you just take it." "I'm not taking it. I'm enduring it. There's a difference." He didn't understand the difference. He couldn't. He had never had to endure anything in his life. His failure to defend her became a constant, grating disappointment. He would offer placating words, make excuses for his mother, and promise things would be different after they were married. Each failure was another nail in the coffin of her affection for him. David saw the toll it was taking. "This is eating you alive, Emily," he said, finding her staring out at the city skyline late one night. "The company can run itself for a week. Take a vacation. Breathe." "I'll breathe when it's over," she said, her reflection in the glass a pale, determined ghost. "I'm so close. David, I can feel it." "What happens after?" he asked quietly. "After you've burned it all down? What's left for you?" She didn't have an answer. Frank Miller, the PI, finally got a break. It wasn't the digital breadcrumbs David's team had left, but a lucky piece of old-fashioned detective work. He'd been canvassing businesses in the same building as the shell company on Emily's faked LinkedIn profile. A security guard, a man with a photographic memory for faces, recognized the photo of Emily Miller had shown him. "Yeah, she comes in here sometimes," the guard said, "but she doesn't work on the 12th floor. She goes to the 80th, top floor, the Carter Dynamics people." The puzzle pieces clicked into place for Miller, but they formed the wrong picture. A girl with no past, a fabricated work history, who secretly visited the headquarters of the very company Whitmore Industries was about to merge with. The conclusion was obvious and devastatingly wrong. He called Margaret immediately. "I've got her," he said, his voice buzzing with triumph. "Your boy's fiancée isn't a gold digger. She's an industrial spy. He laid it all out, the fake identity, the mysterious visits to Carter Dynamics. His theory was that Emily was a corporate agent, hired by the mysterious CEO of Carter to get inside the Whitmore family, gather intelligence, and ensure the merger went through on Carter's terms. For Margaret, this was better than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just that Emily was poor, or from the wrong background. She was a criminal, a saboteur. It was the perfect, unimpeachable reason to destroy her and end the engagement. Armed with Miller's evidence, she prepared for her final assault, not just on Emily, but on her own son's willful blindness. She would save him from the viper he'd brought into their home, and she would relish every moment of it. The confrontation happened in Brandon's cavernous, impersonal penthouse apartment overlooking the park. Margaret was there, a silent, triumphant sentinel. Brandon held a thick manila folder, Miller's report, his hands shaking slightly. "What is this?" "Emily," he asked, his voice strained. He tossed the folder onto the marble coffee table. It landed with a heavy, final thud. Emily looked at the folder, then at Margaret's smug expression, then at Brandon's anguished face. This was it, the moment of truth, his final test. "It's a report from the private investigator your mother hired," she said calmly. "He says you're a spy," Brandon said, the words sounding absurd even as he spoke them. "That you've been feeding information about our company, about me, to Carter Dynamics." "And you believe him?" Emily asked, her gaze steady. He faltered. "I don't know what to believe. It all makes a sick kind of sense. Your secrecy, your job that doesn't exist. You're connected to them, aren't you?" "Yes," Emily said simply. The admission hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step. Margaret, sensing victory, stepped forward. "It's over." "Brandon," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "She's been playing you from the beginning. God knows what she's told them." Brandon looked at Emily, his eyes pleading, "Just tell me the truth, all of it." She couldn't. Not yet. The plan was too close to fruition. Telling him the full truth now would derail everything. She had to see it through. "The truth is that your mother is desperate to get rid of me, and will believe anything that serves that purpose," Emily said. "That's not an answer," he shouted, his composure finally cracking. He ran a hand through his perfect hair. "I love you. I want to marry you. But I can't do it like this. Not with this poison between us." He took a deep breath, steeling himself. It was a speech Margaret had clearly coached him to give. "So here's the deal. The wedding is in 2 weeks. If you want it to happen, you will cut all ties with Carter Dynamics. You will sign this." He slid a document across the table. It was a prenuptial agreement, far more draconian than the one she'd already agreed to. This one contained clauses about fidelity, public image, and, most insultingly, a full waiver of any claims to his intellectual property or business dealings. "Sign it," he said, his voice now cold, "and prove to me that you're with me, and not them, or we're done." He stood there, a little boy playing at being a powerful man, issuing an ultimatum that would save him from having to make a choice, from having to trust her over his mother. And, in that moment, whatever love she had felt for him flickered and died, leaving only the cold ash of her purpose. He had failed the test, spectacularly. Emily looked at the prenup. She looked at Margaret's triumphant smile. She looked at Brandon's weak, desperate face. She picked up the pen. "Fine," she said, her voice a whisper. She signed the document with a steady hand. "I'll sign it." She feigned defeat so perfectly that Brandon's face flooded with relief. He rushed to her, wrapping her in his arms. "Oh, baby. I knew it." He murmured into her hair. "I knew you'd choose me." Over his shoulder, Emily met Margaret's eyes. The older woman's smile was gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, and something else. Fear. Emily hadn't broken. She had bent. And Margaret, for the first time, seemed to understand that the thing that bends is far more dangerous than the thing that breaks. The press conference was set for noon in the soaring, glass-walled atrium of the new Whitmore Tower. It was designed to be a declaration of dominance, a symbolic union of old money and new technology. The CEOs of both companies were to appear together for the first time, signing the final merger documents, live in front of the world's financial press. The event was being live-streamed on every major news network. Outside, a ferocious thunderstorm raged, the sky a bruised purple-gray. Rain lashed against the windows, and distant thunder rumbled like an approaching army. The mood inside was electric with anticipation. Emily stood just off stage, not in a wedding dress, but in a severe, custom-made black suit that was more armor than clothing. She looked out at the sea of reporters, at the bank of cameras, at the Whitmore Industries logo projected onto a massive screen behind the podium. Brandon found her there. He was pale, his tuxedo looking more like a costume than his usual comfortable attire. "I can't believe this is happening," he said, trying for a smile. "Our wedding is in 3 hours, and we're here signing a billion-dollar deal. Only my family." "It's a big day," Emily said, her voice calm. "After this, it's just us," he promised, squeezing her hand. "No more business. No more family drama. I promise." He had no idea what kind of promise he was making. Margaret swept past them, radiating triumphant energy. "Places! Everyone!" she commanded, though she had no official role. She looked Emily up and down. A funereal choice of attire. "Dear, but I suppose it's fitting. The death of your old life." She smiled that thin, sharp smile. "Try not to look so terrified on camera. You are marrying a Whitmore. After all, you've won." The stage manager called for places. Richard Whitmore and the rest of the board were already seated on stage. Margaret took her seat in the front row, the Queen surveying her court. Brandon walked to his position beside the podium. Then, Emily walked onto the stage. A ripple of confusion went through the press corps. They were expecting the CEO of Carter Dynamics, the mythical European recluse, not Brandon Whitmore's fiancée. The teleprompter flickered and went dark. A crack of thunder shook the building. Minor technical glitch. The stage manager announced through their earpieces, "Just speak from the heart, folks." Richard Whitmore stood and walked to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Today marks a historic day for Whitmore Industries." He droned on, but no one was listening. All eyes were on Emily. "Finally," Richard said, "and now, I'd like to introduce the visionary behind Carter Dynamics, who is finally ready to step into the light." He gestured for Emily to come to the podium. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace. She looked at Brandon, whose face was a mask of confusion. She looked at Margaret, who was frowning, annoyed at this deviation from the script. "Good afternoon," Emily began, her voice clear and steady, carrying through the vast atrium without the aid of the faulty microphone. "My name is Emily Carter. Richard is correct. I am the visionary behind Carter Dynamics. I am its founder, its sole shareholder, and its CEO." A collective gasp swept the room. Cameras flashed like lightning. In the front row, Margaret's face went slack with shock. Brandon looked as if he'd been struck by lightning himself. For months, I have allowed the world, and the Whitmore family, to believe a fiction, Emily continued, her eyes locking on Margaret. A fiction that I was a nobody. A charity case, I believe was the term used. I did this because I needed to get close to them, to understand how a family could build an empire on the ruins of so many others. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, and, specifically, on the ruins of my family. She clicked a remote in her hand. The screen behind her, meant to display the Whitmore logo, flickered to life. It showed a grainy photo of a burned-out building. 20 years ago, this apartment building in the Bronx burned to the ground. It was owned by my parents, Daniel and Sarah Carter. The fire destroyed them. The official report cited faulty wiring, a conclusion reached by an inspector who mysteriously came into a great deal of money shortly thereafter. She clicked again. A bank statement appeared on the screen, showing a large deposit into the inspector's account. The source of the transfer, a shell corporation linked to Whitmore Industries. My evidence suggests the fire was arson, Emily said, her voice dropping, laced with ice. Arson committed so the Whitmores could collect on an insurance policy and ruin their business partner. They murdered my parents, as surely as if they had held a gun to their heads. Lies, Margaret shrieked, rising from her seat. This is slander. She's insane. But the proof was on the screen. More documents flashed by depositions, financial records, a trail of corruption that was undeniable. The room was in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. The Whitmore board members were staring, horrified. Just as Emily was about to deliver her final, killing blow revealing the full extent of their financial crimes and the kill switches in the merger contract, she saw David at the side of the stage. He was holding a single file, his expression urgent, almost pleading. He caught her eye and shook his head slightly, tapping the file. Something was wrong. This wasn't part of the plan. He moved swiftly to the podium, pretending to adjust it, and discreetly handed her the file. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single, newly unearthed document. It was a sworn affidavit from the retired fire inspector, Sullivan, taken just hours ago by her investigators. He was dying of cancer and wanted to clear his conscience. I took the money. The affidavit read, but not from the Whitmores. They were victims, too. I was paid to falsify the report, to blame the Carters. The person who paid me, the person who set the fire, was a man named George Peterson. Emily's blood ran cold. George Peterson. He was a rival developer, a man her father had outbid on the Bronx property, and he was now the CEO of Omnicorp, Carter Dynamics' biggest competitor. She looked up from the file, her mind reeling. Her entire life, her entire motivation, had been built on a lie. The Whitmores weren't the architects of her family's destruction. They were just collateral damage. Like her, Margaret's hatred, her cruelty. It wasn't because of class. It was because her own sister had died in that same fire. Elizabeth, the girl in the photograph. Margaret had spent 20 years hating the people she thought were responsible for her sister's death. Just like Emily. The room was still in chaos. Margaret was screaming. Brandon was staring at her, his face a ruin of betrayal and confusion. The world was watching, waiting for her to finish them. She stood at the podium, live, in front of millions, with 2 decades of perfectly planned revenge in her hands, and in a single, devastating moment. She had to choose between the vengeance she craved and a truth that was infinitely more complicated and painful. The rage that had fueled Emily for 2 decades vanished, replaced by a vast, hollow emptiness. She looked at Margaret, who was now being restrained by security, her face contorted with a grief so raw and familiar it mirrored Emily's own. They were two sides of the same tragic coin, both consumed by a hatred built on a false foundation. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Emily turned back to the microphone. The storm outside seemed to pause, holding its breath with the rest of the world. I have just received new information," she said, her voice wavering for the first time. The practiced, icy CEO was gone, replaced by the 7-year-old girl who had lost everything. The evidence I presented is incomplete. The Whitmore family did not start the fire. A stunned silence fell over the atrium, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. "We were all victims," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength as she embraced the horrifying new truth. She held up the affidavit. "This is a confession from the original fire inspector. He was bribed to blame my father, the man who set the fire, the man who killed my parents, and who killed Elizabeth Whitmore." She looked directly into the main broadcast camera. Was George Peterson, now CEO of Omnicorp. The story had changed. It was no longer a tale of a corporate takeover or a personal vendetta. It was now a story of murder, conspiracy, and a cover-up that had spanned 2 decades and destroyed 2 families. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The press conference ended in chaos within the hour. The FBI had raided the offices of Omnicorp. George Peterson was arrested trying to board a private jet to a country with no extradition treaty. The Whitmore empire, already teetering, collapsed under the weight of the scandal. Their stock plummeted to nothing. Their name, once a symbol of power, was now synonymous with tragedy and a miscarried hatred. In a quiet room off the main atrium, Emily sat with Brandon and a shattered Margaret. The rage was gone from Margaret's eyes, replaced by a bottomless, empty despair. "Elizabeth was 16, she said, her voice a dead monotone, speaking to no one in particular. "She was visiting a friend in that building. I told her not to go to the Bronx. I told her it was beneath her." Her body shook with a sob that had been trapped for 20 years. "All this time, I hated your parents. I hated you. Because it was easier than hating myself." Brandon sat between them, a ghost in a tuxedo, stripped of his name, his fortune, and his future. He looked at Emily, his eyes full of a pain that was no longer about his own broken heart, but about the enormity of the shared tragedy. "I'm sorry, Emily," he whispered. It was the first thing he had said that felt completely true. "For everything." Emily nodded, the anger gone, leaving only a profound, aching sorrow. There were no winners here, only survivors. Months later, the autumn chill had settled over the city. The name Whitmore had all but vanished from the society pages. Their assets had been liquidated, most of the money absorbed by the legion of lawyers and creditors that descended like vultures. Emily did not pursue them. Her war was over, in its place. She had started to build. She stood on a newly landscaped patch of green in the Bronx, on the very spot where the apartment building had once stood. A simple, elegant memorial of polished black granite rose from the grass. Today was the dedication. She had used her own money to create the Phoenix Foundation, its first act being the construction of this memorial and a community center next to it. The foundation's purpose was twofold: to provide legal and financial aid to victims of corporate crime, and to fund educational programs for at-risk youth. Destiny, the brilliant young coder from Oakland, whom Emily had taken under her wing, was the first recipient of its flagship scholarship. The crowd at the dedication was small and quiet. It included the families of the other victims of the fire, 17 people whose lives had been irrevocably altered. David was there, a quiet pillar of support at her side. Then, she saw them, arriving together, on foot, were Margaret and Brandon. They were dressed in simple, dark clothing. They looked tired, older. The arrogance had been sandblasted away, leaving something fragile and human. They hadn't been invited, but Emily was not surprised to see them. They stood at the back of the crowd, not as disgraced titans, but as fellow mourners. Emily stepped up to the podium. "We are here today to remember," she began, her voice steady, "to remember the lives that were lost in a fire born of greed, and to remember that the truth, no matter how long it is buried, will always find its way to the light." She didn't mention names or lay blame. The time for that was over. This was a time for healing. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Margaret approached her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but clear. "The memorial is beautiful," she said quietly. "Thank you." She looked at the granite wall where her sister's name was etched next to the names of Daniel and Sarah Carter. "I spent 20 years nurturing a poison. I let it ruin me. I tried to make it ruin you." She took a shaky breath. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want to apologize for my blindness." It was more than Emily had ever expected. She simply nodded in acknowledgement. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a form of peace, a closing of a painful chapter. Brandon stepped forward. "We're moving," he said, "to the West Coast. Mom is going to volunteer at a grief counseling center. I'm going back to school, to become a public defender." He managed a small, sad smile. "It seems I have a lot to learn about justice." As they turned to leave, Emily felt a final, unexpected impulse. "Margaret," she called out. The older woman turned. "The foundation is opening a new chapter in New York," Emily said. "It will be dedicated to helping families navigate the foster care system. It needs a director, someone with fundraising experience, someone who understands loss." Margaret stared at her, her eyes wide with disbelief. It wasn't a pardon. It was a purpose, a chance to build something from the ashes of her life. For the first time, Emily saw the woman she might have been, before grief had twisted her into a monster. Margaret didn't answer, but the silent, grateful tears that traced paths down her worn face were answer enough. Later that evening, Emily was in her office. The panoramic view of the city no longer looked like a circuit board to be conquered, but a community to be protected. David walked in, holding a tablet. "The Omnicorp case is settled," he said. "Their board has been dismantled. Their assets are being seized by the Justice Department." "Good," Emily said. "There's more," David said, a rare, wolfish grin touching his lips. It was the final surprise. As part of the settlement, the government is auctioning off Omni's key assets to recoup funds for their victims. That includes their entire logistics division, the only one in the world that could even pretend to compete with us. Emily looked at him, and for the first time in a very long time, she smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The past was at peace. Her parents' names were cleared. The people she had hated, she now pitied, and perhaps, one day, could help. Her quest for revenge was over. But her pursuit of justice, a new, more righteous form of justice, built on creation instead of destruction, was just beginning.